Now, there's no end in sight, it seems, in the arms deal. The matter was brought before the North Gauteng High Court today, where judgment was reserved. Civil society organizations, Corruption Watch and Right2Know, are behind the urgent application to review and set aside the findings of the Seriti Commission into the arms deal. Judge Willie Seriti's report exonerated those who were facing allegations of massive corruption in government 1999 arms procurement deal. Advocate Jeff Budlender, representing the organizations, argued that the inquiry failed to gather the relevant material evidence that would have assisted to reach a different conclusion. The Office of the President did not oppose the application and indicated it will abide by the decision of the court. The application was heard by a full bench of judges. Well, joining me now in studio is Deborah Mutemwa-Tumbo, who's the head of legal and investigations at the Corruption Watch. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
So, 20 years on,
Yes.
you're still really going for this. Why
Yes.
bring this application at this time?
So it certainly has been a 20-year debacle. However, the commission was actually only called in November 2011, commenced its work in 2012, and published its findings in April 2016. And it's been since then that we've been trying to have these findings set aside. So within 8 months, we actually launched our application to have those findings reviewed and set aside, because we are fundamentally of the belief that the Commission did not investigate as it was mandated to do, and therefore its findings cannot be sustained.
All right, so give us the highlights of your arguments that led you to believe that this was not a fair process.
So there are many features, and I think during the time of the Commission, it took over 3 years for the Commission to finish its work. During its time, there were a lot of features that really just showed that this Commission wasn't running as it should. I think our main arguments is that the Commission failed to obtain evidence that it very easily could have obtained. So, for instance, we had the former disbanded Scorpions, then the Hawks, who had collected over 3 million pieces of documentary evidence that the Commission could have considered, but we are advised that they didn't even consider a fraction of those. Furthermore, upon getting access to some parts of the record, we still, to this day, have not accessed the full record of the findings. We found out that, German authorities and UK authorities actually offered certain information to the Commission, and the Commission failed to take that up. There are also various reports in the public domain that the Commission found or felt was inadmissible. So features such as those of that particular Commission really led us to find or feel that we have to challenge its findings.
The presidency is saying that they will abide by any ruling that comes through. They're not opposing it.
Yes.
Have they supported this action?
No, unfortunately not. We haven't had the express support of the presidency. However, the presidency has made submissions at the court today to aid the court in coming in adjudicating the issues and coming to a conclusion of the issues that are set before it. So they haven't necessarily supported it, but they did not argue against us in too many words.
All right. So now this commission was headed by a full-on judge, Judge Seriti. Now the question now becomes, if you're worried about the process, was it incompetence? Was it negligence? Was it a dereliction of duty? Was it deliberate? The overlooking of evidence, the not listening to, considering all the evidence that was before him at the time. What's your sense? Because this really perhaps is going to be a blot on his name if it is overturned.
It certainly will for the judge, but that isn't necessarily our aim. Our aim is really to ensure that the principle of legality and the rule of law, which are foundational principles of our constitutional democracy, are properly protected. And we as civil society have decided to raise our hand up in the public interest to fight this fight. I wouldn't want to cast aspersions on the judge's name. I don't necessarily understand why it is he conducted the commission of inquiry in the manner that he did. This was something that was called in 2011. There were various commissions of inquiry prior to that. There have been various commissions of inquiry after that. This particular commission of inquiry inquiry was deeply problematic, and I wouldn't want to draw any conclusions outside of the court process.
If I remember correctly, people were resigning from the commission during the time because of the way it was being run.
Yes, and we have worked quite closely with some critical witnesses who refused to take part in the process because they were of the view that the commission wasn't being run in the way that it should have. They've even gone so far as to say that, you know, there was an ulterior motive that they didn't feel they could support. So they had evidence, they had information to share with the public because this was a very public platform. However, they refused to because of the way that the commission was being conducted.
All right, so let's say the court sets aside this ruling by the Seriti Commission. What then? Do you want another inquiry at cost of another 100 million or so?
Yes, so we aren't necessarily asking for that. That is a presidential prerogative. What we want to do is mainly ensure that those that have been accused of being involved in the alleged corruption in the arms deal can no longer use the findings of the commission to exonerate themselves. I think it's important to point out that in any event, a commission of inquiry or the findings of a commission of inquiry are simply recommendations to the president, a commission of inquiry of this sort. And so in any event, they didn't have binding legal effect. However, they have been used since those findings have been published to ensure that people do not face the music, they do not face accountability, and in some instances just, you know, support impunity for the issues that arose.
From the evidence that you've seen yourself, would you say, and you know, you're not a judge, but would you say that there's enough evidence to suggest that there was a level of impropriety?
Certainly. I think we even see now in the public domain, we are seeing, you know, connections between Thales and our former president. There's a very famous law firm from America that had a report into one of the suppliers in the arms deal, and they had evidence, or they had found through investigation that various payments were made to politically connected individuals. And the reason for those payments weren't completely clear because it wasn't clear what value those particular individuals were adding. So there's definitely a lot of information in the public domain that caused the public to really react in the way that it did. Over 40 civil society organizations during the time of the commission were highly active in, you know, protesting the way that it was being run and also calling for a commission of inquiry prior to its calling.
All right. Well, thanks very much indeed for coming through to the studio and sharing your thoughts with us and why you've taken this important action. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so that was Deborah Mutemwa-Tumbo, who's head of legal investigation at Corruption Watch, one of the two bodies that have brought this case to court to have Judge Seriti's report set aside.